My name is Wes Wilson. How many have seen Gasland or Split Estate? The reason I was in this movie is because I am the EPA whistleblower. In 2004, I wrote a long analysis of EPA's fraudulent report on hydraulic fracking. At least I felt it was fraudulent. I wrote to the United States Congress and the EPA Inspector General about the mistakes that EPA had made in that study. That study concluded that although the fracking recipes were toxic at the point of injection and not all of it came back, it presented little or no risk to drinking water. They even went so far as to say this area needed no further study. As a scientist, as an engineer, I've never seen a report that said we need no further study. One of the aspects of that study, of EPA study, I thought was might have led to those misunderstandings of the risks of hydraulic fracking was due to the apparent financial conflict of interest. 5 out of the 7 EPA panel members had financial ties to the industry. So what I want to do is spend some time tonight talking to you about how this industry has, what type of exemptions it has from environmental statutes at the federal level. And let me make one point particularly clear. This has been bipartisan support. Both parties have supported exempting the oil and gas industry in the United States from environmental practices. Let me start off this way. It's good to recall why the United States uses natural gas. I mean, the number one reason, it's ours. It's domestic. But there's so much oversupply, particularly because of your Marcellus shale development. It's now, the price of natural gas has fallen, so there's actually an oversupply in the United States today. When we burn natural gas, it is cleaner. It has no nitrogen oxides or sulfur oxides, particulate matter, very little, and no mercury. So in my office, we would say it has no SOx, NOx, or ROx. You know, it burns clean compared to coal. And when it burns, it also emits less carbon dioxide compared to coal. So at the time of burning, it's cleaner. But how many remember T. Boone Pickens' plan? You know, we're going to use the natural gas as the bridge fuel to the future, meaning we'll get off of coal, which is more harmful to the climate, it was thought, and use natural gas as a way to get us to renewables before we get into a serious predicament with climate change. Unfortunately, that turns out to not be correct. Due to work released just 8 weeks ago by Dr. Robert Haworth, right here in Cornell, Dr. Haworth just did the careful analysis of how much methane is leaked during production. So we look at the life cycle consequences of the carbon footprint of natural gas. It turns out there's enough leak, just at 3 to 7% of what's produced is leaked. But since methane traps heat better than CO2, it turns out it's actually equal to or worse than coal under some analysis, even twice as harmful to the climate, especially in the short term, than coal. So here we are, our bridge fuel is worse than our last one. It's quite difficult to swallow in terms of getting us some progress on the serious issue of climate change. Now, I come from Denver, Colorado, where I spent 38 years working for the Environmental Protection Agency. I was a civil servant that long. And of course, we've been drilling out there in the West since aggressively, since the last half century or more. But now drilling is taking place in 34 states. So it's widespread. It's very widespread. I use the term that if you happen to live in country that was under the sea at some time, you'll be drilled on. This is an industry that can get blood out of their turnip because they're going after formations that are what we call unconventional. How many of you have heard of that term? You know, realize this is unconventional gas. Well, it's sort of a nonsense term. But what they're doing, let's see if I can't hold the mic. I like to talk with my hands. I was trying to describe sort of the difference between conventional gas and unconventional. For the first century of oil and gas development, they were looking for some kind of trap underground. Think of an anticline, a dome. Some place that would be like an inverted bathtub or an inverted long trough that would hold the oil and gas from coming to the surface. If it wasn't trapped like that, the oil and gas would have just come up without a trap. It might have come to clear the atmosphere and not been available for a future resource. So when the industry was looking for conventional trapped oil and gas deposits, they would hit gas, oil, salty water. So as they developed over time, they would eventually bring up that water, called produced water, and they would have every economic interest in re-injecting it right back where it came from to keep the pressure up in the target formation. Well, this Marcellus gas, this unconventional shale gas, is quite different. It's not trapped. The oil and gas come from the animals that died some 500 million years ago, and as the other deposits fell down on it, it's sort of like an elevator. It went down. And during enough heat and pressure underground, it was converted into fossil fuel. But the oil and gas never moved out of that formation. So it's not a trap. But it's in such tight rock, it has to be broken in order to be recovered by the well. So the USGS started classifying that as unconventional gas. It's untrapped. For us as citizens, one thing that means is there's no dry holes in an unconventional play. They always get their man. It's like the Mounties. They always get their man. I mean, in a trap condition, you might be off the target zone and hit a dry hole. But here, they've gone through it enough. They've mapped the formation. So they always succeed at some amount of gas. Well, what they've done is just kind of rather ingeniously put together two technologies. The ability to do accurate GPS-managed horizontal drilling. They can make a tight radius now after they go down vertically and go out into the formation. You can see that if you go through, right through the formation, you don't hit much rock. If you go along it, you can have a lot more of the reservoir available. But once they do that, they're still in tight shale. I think it was described. I mean, they wouldn't yield gas. The gas is in there, but it's trapped. So they need to frack it. And the process involves, after they've done that production tubing and cased around it, they'll seal off a part of the well, put in charged, dynamite it through those casing, so they have some access back into the formation. Then they use large pumping facilities on the surface, sometimes 5,000, even 7,500 horsepower diesel engines, to raise the pressure above the parting pressure of the underground rock. What they do then is put in a slurry. It's a little bit viscous. It's sort of like tapioca or something, and it runs the liquid agent back in there that contains sand, usually, or a proppant. Sometimes it's ceramic beads. And the purpose of that is, once they pull the fluid back out, the bead holds their fracture open and they can get gas to the well. Now, in order to do that, they have to use a lot of chemicals. It's stunning to me, the variety of chemicals that can be used. Thanks to Henry Waxman of the House Resources Committee, released a report about 3 months ago. We know pretty much more about these chemicals than we did last year. And they do a lot of functions. They act as detergents, they act as braking agents, they act as biocides, they act as surfactants. So they're doing a lot of different reactions. And now we're up to a list of possible, sort of like the grocery store of where you might get your fracking recipe. There might be 1,000 possible ingredients. Any one frack recipe would contain vastly fewer, maybe just 20s or 30s. But the industry is fond of saying this is not particularly toxic, they claim, because it's only 1% or even 0.5% containing these other materials other than just water and sand. Well, one could say the same thing about sewage. I mean, sewage is 99% water. It's the toxic part that we're worried about. And so if they are using up to 4 million gallons of frack job, that means at 0.5%, 20,000 gallons of these additional ingredients are included. For the most part, that's a secret, however. It's proprietary. That is, it's not disclosed. It's not disclosed in most states. One Wyoming, Arkansas, and now Texas last week have started initial requirements to require the disclosure. So let's get back to some of these exemptions. I started out with what concerns me as a federal civil servant is just how much Congress has left this jurisdiction entirely to the state, and it lacks that federal oversight. Normally, our environmental programs work with a federal national law, so we don't have industries picking one state apart from another and making some convenient deal that might be bad for the environment or the community. And so we have this national set of environmental laws that the states then often adopt and meet a minimum federal requirement. Not so in the exploration production business for oil and gas. Right after my whistleblowing to Congress, the EPA did start an investigation by their Office of Inspector General. Could I have a drink of water? Yeah, I'm about to croak over here. They did start the investigation, but very soon thereafter, Congress passed an exemption under the Energy Policy Act of 2005, which exempted the practice of injecting for the purpose of fracking from the Safe Drinking Water Act requirements. So EPA stopped its investigation since it was no longer contrary to law. Thanks, Jeff.
Yep, sure.
Another part that's exempt is kind of more or less related to a loophole. Under the Clean Air Act, EPA doesn't have the authority to aggregate all these sources in the fields. Rather, each one is small enough to leak some toxic gas, but they aren't concluded enough to be a big enough source to come under the protections of the Clean Air Act and restrictions, particularly on their volatile organic compounds, which are so toxic. The third thing I want to mention is the Superfund Act. Right here in New York, Congress created a Superfund to clean up hazardous waste sites after the Love Canal disaster. Well, that law applies to every other type of industry. And the meaning of this law is to allow the federal government the ability to hold the property owner accountable for pollution. So if you were the property owner here in this building and there happens to be discovered some pesticide or oil under it or something, you can't use the excuse that the prior owner did it. If you're the current owner, EPA can and will take you to court and force you to clean up. The current owner is responsible. So it's joint and several liability. Not so in the oil and gas field. In the oil and gas field, they're exempt from that. And it means my peers, still back at EPA, have to prove that one party and not, company A and not company B did the dirty deed. And we have to figure it out. So it's very much more difficult, that type of liability exemption. There's two types of problems in this industry. We either have bad wells that go bad, or we have good wells that go bad. Bad wells go, only one of these will the industry talk about. They're willing to talk about bad wells go bad. Now, how does that happen? Well, they didn't put the cement in, or the cement wasn't properly done. In my state of Colorado, we have a problem where just the rules aren't adequate enough. They don't cement all the way down through the aquifers. So you can have that type of bad well. Somebody screwed up in the field. You can have spills. I mean, this is human activity. It's large-scale human activity. And whatever labor we have, I mean, they can make mistakes or even intentional actions. Some of these pits, we hear reports from the field that in order to reduce their number of truck trips that they make from the pit to the long-distance facility, they might even shoot holes in the liner in order to cut down the amount of truck traffic they have to do and meet their production obligations. So we have bad wells that go bad. But the biggest question for me as a professional is whether we have a systemic problem. Just how significant are how preventive protecting us are the good wells, the wells that are built right to engineering specifications. Now, we knew little about this. One of the suspect good well causing a problem would be that the overlying geology doesn't adequately separate the upper aquifer from where it's being fracked. In fact, here in the Marcellus, when Hazen and Sawyer did their report to the city of New York, their geologists concluded, watch out, there's a risk here. It could be so brittle that what you're fracking, it gets connected to other fractures and the gas could come up. It was a hypothesis. But 6 weeks ago, Professor Howard at the Duke University released a report with his colleagues, and they looked at some 62 wells, if I recall right. Might have been 65. But they found 85% of the domestic wells they looked at that were within just a kilometer of a drilled well, 85% of these domestic wells had thermogenic gas contamination. That's at high concentrations. So it was a real signal and pretty shock in the industry, because we don't think we have that many bad wells. At a bad level kind of change, would you hold your questions to the end? At a bad level kind of change, we would expect 1, 2, 3% kind of mistakes. 85% is indicative of a systemic problem. Now, we don't know yet if that means it was improper, all that the concrete is not working, it's coming right up behind the production tubing, or if it's this type of brittle geology pathway. Certainly if it's the latter, it's a much more significant problem for the industry. One of my issues was trying to get EPA to focus on an air pathway, or trying to get the states to focus on the air pathway as well. When the fracking fluid is returned to the surface, it is put back in a pit. And in addition to the toxic materials went down, it can bring more toxic materials back. Most shales in the world contain radioactive material as a result of the mountain detritus that formed them. And so the fracking fluid acts as a lixiviant. It acts as a sort of acidic condition. They're often acidic. And it can release the radioactivity back to the frac flow and come back up the well. We've just found out from work from Dr. Ron Bishop that there's a third type of toxic component. And what he has discovered is, in fact, some of the organic chemicals that went down can be altered in the earth to different toxic chemicals and come back up the frac flow. So when that comes back, it comes back into a large pit. And what's the industry's intention there? Well, they have high pressure, high flows, certainly cheaper to come into an open evaporative pit than a tank, but they want to get rid of the volatiles as well, these toxic volatiles. And if you're nearby, you're breathing them. You're going to hear stories later tonight what kind of consequences that has. Well, after that, then they take them into some condensate tanks once they start producing enough gas. But many of those tanks are unvalved and released to the atmosphere. So we have this air pathway even when things go wrong. Remember, I'm still in the category of good wells going wrong. Now, finally, the final thing that can cause a risk is just these volatile organic compounds condense and rain back on the ecosystem right in place, and over long term create ecological risk. Well, EPA is back on the job. Starting last year, the Obama EPA under Lisa Jackson said they would take up the request of Congress. You recall that the previous Congress, Democratic Congress, had requested EPA to investigate the consequences of hydraulic fracking with relation to drinking water. So EPA has started that study. So it's budgeted at $12 million and have preliminary results at the end of next year, final results 2014, quite a ways out. You know, they've selected some pretty good experts in that. I have great hope that they can achieve something and help us understand both how frequent the bad wells go bad and whether I'm and other experts are right on our theories about good wells going bad. EPA had announced in July of last year that it would include this air pathway, because once EPA scientists got this issue, they realized that we're going to take a holistic look. But EPA has retreated from that. I encourage you to write to Lisa Jackson and get her to reverse this. The EPA has retreated from that, and just this week, Josh Fox, the producer of Gasland, was interviewing Lisa Jackson, the head of EPA, and she said no, she would not put back the investigation of the air pathway into the study. We have another study going on. The Department of Energy, Obama's Secretary of Energy, Stephen Chu, has appointed a seven-member panel to look at this. And I must say, he's given this panel the right question. It's a great question. How to make fracking safer, which implies it's not safe. I wish he had added how to make fracking safer in a way that it's transparent and believable to the public. I wish he added that phrase, but at least he added, how do we make it safer? But to me, it looks like Yogi Bear said, it looks like deja vu all over again. Because by the way I calculate, 6 or 7 of these panel members have some financial or appearance of financial conflict. That is, they work for or have current ties with the industry. The chairman in this panel, John Deutsch, the former CIA director, is now CEO, board chairman of Cheniere Energy, a company that would like to take American domestic gas and export it overseas. One of the other members, Stephen Holdatek, is from Texas A&M University now, but he had former ties to Schlumberger and Shell. He's now involved with a company in Texas, Matador Resources, which is actively involved in the Barnett Shale, a similar type of formation in Texas. Well, what we know is we got an urgent need to improve. We know bad wells go bad. This is an industry that's sort of locked in the 19th century with respect to improving its methods of protecting the environment. One of the consistent problems in this industry is even when a bad well goes bad, we don't find out why. Why don't we find out why? Because the industry will make a deal with the property owner they contaminated and always ends up with a non-disclosure agreement. It always ends up as a secret financial arrangement. I mean, it's between two parties. The states do not investigate and determine these pathways. One of the things I say sometimes is, we need sort of a national transportation safety board like we have for airplanes. We need that for the oil business. If you fly, all of us fly, you have a reasonable understanding that that industry has improved. Big part of why they've improved is because every accident leads to investigation that's transparent, public reviewable, and the industry learns. We learn if it's the pilot or the plane or the maintenance, and it improves. Not so in the oil and gas business. It is literally buried and out of sight. So we fail to learn from our mistakes. One of the key reasons I think we know something is wrong is the anecdotal public health information that's the citizens' complaints about their health that's coming in consistently across the country. Now, as a scientist, I'll tell you it's anecdotal. I mean, we're getting a lot of information from citizens, and adults and exposure to toxics is an exceedingly complex subject. So, I mean, adult lifestyle influences health as much as exposure to chemicals at times. So it's not a rigorous scientific study. But the reports are consistent. The nosebleeds, the peripheral neuropathy, the gland failures, those type of things are occurring in Pinedale, Wyoming, Garfield County, Colorado, Dish, Texas, Damascus, Hickory, Pennsylvania. So I meant to say Dimmick, Pennsylvania, and Hickory. So those reports are consistent. We know we need to improve. The industry can improve. I mean, as citizens, you've got to make up your mind whether you're shooting for a ban or shooting for improvement. You can do both. I'm a technician. I'm shooting for improvement. I'm a pragmatist. I know there's drilling. It's either got to be clean or dirty. Let's make it clean. We can make it cleaner. We can take away these exemptions and have some federal oversight. We can allow the local home rule counties and local home rule communities to have a bottoms-up push to improve, something which is blocked, by the way. As an expert on government process, it's stunning to me that this industry only has a state regulator. There's no one above to check, and there's no one below to push for better. The way we can do this is to make a performance-based standard. If the industry were heavily monitored in its groundwater and air emissions at the time of drilling and only allowed to drill the next one when they proved their last one was clean, they would improve it. We don't have to worry about how or the cost. but there shouldn't be drilling that causes public health risk or public health problem. Whatever the cost is necessary. My own view is that the kind of technologies I envision to make it cleaner are well within the industry's ability to afford it. They will make less profit, but they will make substantial profit. This is an industry making 30 to 40% annual return on investment per year. They have the ability within just a slight lowering of their profit margin to make these technologies that I'll describe. We call, there's one method Colorado uses but doesn't impose, but it's called green completion technologies. Instead of letting this frack water come back to a pit, they send it right to a tank with valves, so it doesn't escape to the air. In fact, they get more methane that way. The reason they don't do it, it's more costly than the methane they capture, but it's better for us. We can require green fracking fluids. It doesn't have to be this toxic. It wasn't until after EPA subpoenaed Halliburton for its fracking recipes that a week later Halliburton came out and said, oh, we can make benign fracking recipes, mostly from food-grade products. We can demand that, and we can certainly demand that they do a better job of just in the sealing and the plugging of wells. So that's one way to look at it, how to make it cleaner. I thank you for your attention, and we'll move on to the next speaker.